Israel has reportedly cut off Gaza's electricity supply in an effort, they say, to pressure Hamas into releasing the remaining hostages. The decision comes as a delegation from Tel Aviv is set to arrive in Qatar today to advance ceasefire negotiations. Let's bring in Dr. Atilla Kisla. He is the International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern Africa Litigation Center. Dr. Kisla, thank you for joining us this afternoon. It is almost unthinkable to be cutting off electricity to Gaza at a time like this. Just earlier this month, reports of 6 babies having died from the cold in Gaza as displaced people continue to shelter in tents.
Exactly. I mean, electricity is a key need, especially for the Palestinians in Gaza, people and civilians in an armed conflict. And in that context, and in this context, cutting off the electricity can actually form part of war crimes or crimes against humanity. And unfortunately, this is not the first time that the Israeli side or Israeli government has decided to cut off electricity. It happened before and actually forms part of the legal analysis of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. The International Criminal Court, for instance, emphasized in its decision on the arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant that it found reasonable grounds to believe that cutting off the electricity actually contributed to a war crime of starvation, and further held that cutting off the electricity further created or contributed to conditions of life that were calculated to bring about the destruction of the civilian population in this context, which the court then, in its assessment, considered as contribution to the crime against humanity of murder. So here you can see we are dealing with a form of warfare which constitutes a form of collective punishment, which is a clear violation of international law.
Yeah, and the thing about cutting off electricity is that it impacts the supply of water in Gaza. So effectively, it is cutting off water and electricity.
Exactly. I mean, it goes way beyond about not having electricity. It impacts the access to water, access to food, heating in these cold months. So it goes beyond just like having electricity and having the lights on in the night in this context. So what happens now, especially insofar as ceasefire negotiations are concerned? We understand that there's a delegation arriving in Qatar today to continue what has really been a fragile ceasefire, hasn't it? The first phase ended on the 1st of March. What do you think is needed to take the ceasefire from phase 1 into what Hamas describes as phase 2? I'm not sure. I'm not a political expert, but from I think it's the reports that we see that Israel tries to extend the phase 1 in order to get more hostages out seems plausible to me. But at the end of the day, it comes also down to whether Israel will actually respect the orders that were issued by the International Court of Justice in the course of last year, and also whether the international community will implement and respect the advisory opinion that the International Court of Justice issued in July last year, which actually obligates any state to cease any aid or abetting or contributing or supporting Israel that can contribute to the illegal occupation. So in that regard, I think it's this move by Israel and indicates that there is no, at this stage, I mean, we will see how those talks go, but at this stage, there's not great interest in getting into serious negotiations about ending this war.
So Dr. Kisla, it's water, it's electricity, but it's also just the general blockade around any aid entering Gaza.
Exactly, and that's the big issue here. I mean, it's not the first time that we are discussing the issue of not allowing any humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's since the first provisional measure at the early last year, we have been discussing this issue, and in the second provisional measure from March last year, the International Court of Justice actually emphasized that. That Israel must allow humanitarian aid, including electricity. So the court is well aware of the importance of electricity in this context. Unfortunately, from the Israeli side, we haven't seen much implementation, and one will have to see how whether whether any of these orders can be implemented in the future.
Yeah, certainly. In this context, Dr. Kisla, you know, everyday life is obviously, and has been for some time, near impossible. But how do life-saving organizations like hospitals, doctors, nurses who are there to help, how do they work in a context of no clean running water, no electricity?
I cannot even imagine how people work in these conditions. And that's why this cutting off the electricity actually forms part of these international crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity, because international law knows about the importance of having electricity in order to keep a basic infrastructure going and just saving lives, civilian lives here. So I think in that regard, we need to see not only action from the Israeli side, but we also need to see more actions from the international community, and not only see words of condemnation or calls for adherence to international law. We need to see more action that implements these kind of orders that we have seen by the International Court of Justice, but also by the International Criminal Court, to hold these individuals responsible.
Dr. Atilla Kisla, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Unpack this latest decision by Israel to cut off Gaza's electricity supply. Dr. Kisla is the International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Center.